Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Lloyd Powell, and I'm part of the ACCA UK team, working the technical policy and strategic engagement team. Thank you all very much for joining us today for this cybersecurity live hack with our partners Wolfbury Cyber. Delighted to have colleagues Tom and Damon with us today. Before we move into the session itself, I'd like to draw your attention to the housekeeping information, which is on the screen now. This will give you all the information that you need about the platform that we're using today. A copy of the slides also available to download in the resources sections of your screen. We'll be conducting some polls during the session, but if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, please pop those in the question and answer section as well. As I said, there'll also be some pop-up polls through the session, and please respond to those so we'll get some great feedback from you as well. So on to today's session. As you'll all be aware, the last year has seen an increase in cyber attacks, and the sophistication of those attacks is increasing, and the techniques that are being used are getting harder to spot. According to the UK Office for National Statistics, people are more likely to fall victim to fraud or cyber offences than any other crime. Almost half of businesses and a quarter of charities report having had cybersecurity breaches or attacks in the last 12 months. And we also know from some of the conversations we have with bodies such as the National Cybersecurity Centre that cyber attacks on accountancy firms and finance institutions are likely to increase as well. It's estimated that global losses from cybercrime rocketed to nearly $1 trillion in 2020, as the pandemic provided new opportunities for hackers to target both individuals and businesses. It is commonly believed that cybersecurity attacks only affect larger organizations. However, smaller firms are actually more likely to be targeted, as they're seen as a softer target. According to the Office for National Statistics, one small business in the UK is successfully hacked every 19 seconds. Larger corporations will have larger resources to implement a strong cybersecurity strategy, whereas smaller organizations may not be able to commit to that level of investment. Anyway, that's the bad news, but I'm looking forward today to hearing from Damon Rands and from Tom Evans, and they're from Wolfbury Cyber, our partner, and you'll see in our resources section, they've got some great resources already available, but I'm going to hand over now to Damon and Tom to talk through some of the issues and some of the challenges and what people can do about it, but also to do a live hack as well to show how this can pan out as well. So over to you, Damon and Tom, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Lloyd. Great to be with everybody today. So as Lloyd said, my name is Damon. I am founder and CEO of Wolfbury Cyber. We're here today from our Newport R&D office over in sunny Wales, and it is sunny. It's just the clouds and the rain are hiding it at the moment. And we're joined by Thomas. Say hello, Tom.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. And Tom leads up our pen testing team, and he's the gentleman today who's put this live hack together. Just very, very briefly about Wolfbury. We're a cybersecurity company that obviously, and we're just think of us as a virtual cyber team for our clients. We help them identify and manage the cyber risks that they face, you know, because quite often it's understanding the risks you face, then you can take the proper steps to protect and to, you know, learn and improve your defenses, because cybersecurity, as we all know, is not an IT issue. And Lloyd is completely correct around smaller organizations and organizations of all sizes and shapes and all sectors are victims every day of cybercrime. I think it was every 19 seconds, you said, I think, Tom. And we do see a lot of organizations who are not necessarily always the target being breached in order to reach another organization. And law firms and accountancy firms are part of that supply chain that hold a rich amount of information. If you think from an accountancy point of view, why hack one company when you can hack an individual company. Why not hack an organization that holds a whole load of sensitive information and monetary information? You might as well target that one source. So it does see accountancy firms, as I said, law firms as well, as prime targets for cyber criminals. So I think if we'd had this conversation about 3 or 4 years ago, we would be talking about all these different types of cyber threat, from malware and phishing and SQL injection, denial of service attacks, which are probably the most boring of all cyber crime, right? And DNS attacks and all these other things, zero-day exploits. And while these things are still, are around, we saw a big DNS attack very recently, they still are there. They really pale in comparison to sort of 2 areas at the moment that most companies have to deal with and the most destructive, and that is really phishing and ransomware. Would you say that's right, Tom?
Yeah, I would say 90% of the breaches we have to go and attend and help our customers with start off with a phishing email, and probably about 70% of those end in ransomware. It's sadly a really good strategy for criminals to almost guarantee some sort of payment with little to no risk to them.
Yeah, completely. And cyber criminals are quite lazy, really, so they want the easiest route to compromise. And I think another NCSC stat, Lloyd, that we saw that has been played out over the last 12 months is between 80 and 90% of all breaches in the UK have started with a phishing campaign. So that problem of phishing is a real issue, and I'm sure the live hack today is going to incorporate some of that. Well, I know it is. So, we'll talk a little bit more. I think towards the end, if we've got enough time, there's an example of where we're going to see ransomware going over the next couple of months as well, or to a year. So that'll be quite interesting as well. But I think briefly before we start the actual live hack, I just wanted to go through a very brief example, but one that will resonate with most of you, I would have thought today, of a recent monetary breach that we saw, and it was quite interesting. But it's so common, I thought it's worth showing. So a couple of months ago, we were contacted by an organization, and the scenario involves a finance clerk, CFO, and a hacker. So in this case, the CFO was actually working for a charity, but that's irrelevant. The CFO could be working for any organization at all, obviously. But basically what the hacker did was send a phishing email out. Now, this phishing email went to the whole organization in a very similar way that we're going to see today in our live hack. And it went to a number of the employees. Those then who clicked on it received something very similar to this, hello, your name, your password expires today. Continue using your password. Unfortunately for us, well, for them anyway, the CFO clicked on this link and was confronted with this screen, at which point he entered his password in and everything went back to normal. Clicked onto Office, but the problem was the computer had actually been compromised at this point. Now, the hacker hadn't installed any software at all on the computer system. All he had done was obtain the credentials. And there was no other protection around that, which is something that we'll talk about later. I am conscious as well that we are an industry that is just awash with acronyms, and we do try to not use them as much as we can, but feel free to drop any questions in if it's possible. Around, if we do slip into acronym or jargon territory, and we will try to explain that as best as we can. So at this point, the CFO is now being compromised. And what the cyber criminal was doing was the client was using Office 365. And as most of you will know, the emails will go in there and you can create rules. And what the cyber criminal, unbeknownst to the CFO, the cyber criminal had created a rule that every time an email comes in for the CFO, it was getting diverted into a folder. I think it was the junk folder that it was going into. So the CFO wasn't seeing any new emails coming in. The the rule was taking it directly into the junk folder, where the hacker then was logging in, reviewing the emails, checking, looking for any juicy information, and then moving them back into the inbox. So there was a delay while the hacker was doing that the CFO was completely unaware of. And then basically what happened, the CFO posted about going on holiday. The hacker took this as an opportunity then to send a genuine email, because remember, he's already learned all the language skills and the relationship between the finance clerk and the CFO and everything. He was aware of they were aware of the project that was going on. Basically, they tied the fact that they were on holiday to the location, to the mentioned the location, mentioned the project that was ongoing, sent an email to the finance clerk saying, we need to pay this invoice today. And it was, can you remember how much it was?
It was just in excess of £35,000.
Yeah, £35,000. The money was paid, and then nobody recognized it. Nobody batted an eyelid. And it was only then, it was an interesting one after, Tom, because it got picked up later, didn't it?
Yeah, this whole thing actually happened a second time, about a month afterwards.
Yeah.
For another, I think it was £20,000 of an invoice. So it was only at that point the finance clerk thought, something's not quite right here.
Yeah, this is something that plays out time and time again, isn't it? And you've seen how, some ridiculously expensive frauds like this, haven't you?
Exactly. This same thing happens to businesses and charities of all sizes. I think the smallest one that I've been involved with was a couple of £100, a couple of $100, and the largest one I dealt with was around $25 million in this malicious payment to the wrong person. So it affects all businesses of all shapes and sizes in different areas. It's just something we need to be aware of, that the threats can come from within the organization as well as from the outside.
That's right. And it is just a level of alertness, right? And we will talk, obviously, we will explain and talk around how you combat these things. And quite often, though, it boils down to process and procedures more than any shiny bit of gadgets, because I should say at this point, there is no silver bullet that can stop these things happening. It is quite often people and processes that are a combat to a lot of these issues. There are things that you can put in, help identify things. There's good codes of conduct and practice that you can put in around Office 365 and Google Mail and all these things. But quite often it boils down to people. I just very quickly before we move on to phase one of the video of the live hack, it's worth saying. I remember we did a phishing exercise for a client, and at one point they kept getting 15% of the staff clicking on the link, and the last one that was sent was, "This is a phishing email. Please do not click on this because it's a phishing email." And then the link was, "This is a phishing email link. Do not click on it. It is a test." And that virtually that 15% still clicked on it. So, that's the combat. The bit we've got to combat is those people who click on things. They're quite often busy. And again, cyber criminals are clever, right? They know when to send emails. They know when people are pushed to their limits. When Hillary Clinton's Gmail, Google Mail account of the Democrats, not Republicans, sorry, the Democrats got hacked. The email was sent in the middle of the night, and they know they'd all been up very late. And so the cyber criminals are clever because there's a lot of money to be made in cyber crime. So it's always worth thinking about. Right, so over to you now, Tom, and we're going to talk about phase one.
So what do we actually have in store for you today? So we're going to hopefully demonstrate a live hack, which will show a number of real-world security issues. So these are things that we see day in, day out that are affecting our customers, that we respond to in terms of incident response, and attacks that we're picking up in our security operations center. And although what we'll notice as we go through the phases, a number of these are relatively small, they're relatively inconceivable in the wider picture, but we'll see how small bits of information and small compromises can be put together to sort of gain overall control of an individual, an account, or even a whole organization. We'll try and, as we go through the presentation, cover a range of topics that are commonly misunderstood. So we'll look at things around password policies, and how just because you have an uppercase character, a number, and a symbol doesn't necessarily make your password more secure. Mm-hmm. We'll look at the importance of multi-factor authentication, that 6-digit number or that token you have to do when you log onto an account. And we'll show that actually how that can be a really good security feature, but it's not, once again, that silver bullet that solves all your problems. And finally, as we've just touched on, we'll look at how attacks can come from within the organization as well as from the outside. And to do all this, we're going to break it down into phases. The reason we'll break it down into phases is for two main reasons. The first, it means it's easy to digest. We can go through and we can answer any questions or comments as we're going through the live hack demonstration. But also because from a cyber criminal's perspective, either an attacker or from a cyber defender's perspective, sitting in a security operations center, we will use these individual phases as a way of breaking the attack down into distinct sections. And each one of these sections will have its own defenses or its own indicators of compromise that we can use to either detect or block these attacks in the real world. So I suppose with that out of the way, phase one, we'll start off with some initial reconnaissance.
The first step in reconnaissance is passive information gathering. This is where we will gain as much information about a target company as possible, whilst not drawing any suspicion to ourselves. Typically, this will involve visiting the company website, in our case, suttonhill.com. Casually scrolling through the website doesn't identify anything abnormal that you wouldn't find on a normal accountancy site. However, Sutton Hill have published just enough information that gives us as an attacker a number of different avenues that we can follow. The first avenue comes from the publication of employee email addresses and names. Here we can see there are 4 employees of Sutton Hill, including the CEO and founder John Wright, 2 accountants, Ned and Tara, and an IT support engineer, Bruce Cole. Hovering over each of the employee photographs appears to show a shortcut revealing the employee's email address, which conveniently is in a consistent format of firstname.lastname@suttonhill.com. Additionally, on the website we can see in the navigation bar at the top a shortcut that allows staff to log on to their HR and payroll system, which will take us to the Access A-Cloud login page. This is our first indication of a potential supplier or trusted entity that Sutton Hill will have a relationship with. At this stage, we may use a range of technical toolsets to dig deeper into Sutton Hill, involving interrogating technical resources such as DNS, mail server configurations, as well as data indexed by various search engines. Here we make use of a tool called the Harvester to automatically identify things that Google, Yahoo and Bing will have indexed about Sutton Hill, including a list of email addresses for employees. We will save these for use later on in further attacks. So to recap, at the reconnaissance stage we were able to identify employee names, job roles and email addresses. We were able to find a consistent email format of firstname.lastname@suttonhill.com, and we were able to identify a range of third-party services or providers, such as Access A-Cloud and services like Microsoft 365.
Right, so that's really interesting. So we've got a poll up on the screen at the moment. I'd urge everybody, if they can, to answer it. It is completely anonymous, it should be said. So, but I think it will be good to inform us as we go along and maybe have discussions around that as well. So I think that'll be really, really useful. So what we just heard about then is about scraping the internet, which is quite interesting. And it's quite often, Tom, we'll get asked around You know, how do you stop that phase from happening? But it's really difficult, isn't it? Because companies, you know, for most, a website or the internet is a form of advertising for them. So
it is. And I don't think any company out there really can say we're not going to have any internet presence at all. But I think when you publish something online, whether that be a blog post, a contact us form, or anything that you're putting on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, you ask the question not just what can I use this for in terms of my business to give me a benefit, but how could somebody use that against me? Yeah. And a really good example there, we had the email addresses for Ned and Tara and Bruce. Well, if they'd simply published a contact@suttonhill.com or a hello or information@suttonhill.com, we've already straight away removed a certain amount of information that an attacker can use to target us.
Yeah, I think so many firms, they want to be friendly, don't they? Especially the larger firms, and you know, and that removing that contact at or info at and sales at is a way of them doing that. And then and it is always, like everything in cybersecurity, is about layers, right? Because even if you get hold of one email address and you know their format, so it's like rwilliams at or tevans or drands or damon.rands and so on. Once you can do that, then you can try and use a mechanism to guess. You know, you can get a dictionary, can't you, of names, and you can
guess names. You can go to LinkedIn and you can pull 2 or 3 different data sources together to give you the emails. Now, I think the key thing from my perspective is training. There are going to be certain individuals within your organization. Predominantly, that's going to be your HR, your customer service, your sales teams, although there will be others that will be around for different organizations. They're going to feel the forefront of these types of attacks because they are the publicly facing individuals for your business. Yeah. So make sure, one, that you train them around what sort of risks they're potentially exposed to. Do some phishing simulations, which we'll come on to hopefully in the next stage. Yeah. Get them to see what potentially is out there, and that way you're preparing for the worst.
I'm smiling because I had a conversation. I was up in London with Lucy on Friday, right? And we had a discussion with somebody about this. And basically, a company had been breached through a phishing email. Surprise, surprise, through sales, and basically it got from sales to the CFO, and that's where the problem started. But sales were like merrily walking around the office, whistling away, quite happy as Larry, and everybody else was in a war room setting trying to work out the mess. So yeah, sales are an interesting group, and they're an interesting threat.
And once again, we're never going to stop. I mean, if you think a cyber criminal can send 1,000 emails in the blink of an eye, we're never going to stop all 1,000 of them. Yeah. But it's about, if we can make only one person click the link, well, that's better than 999 of them clicking the link. No, but also, completely. I think it's the culture around that. I mean, people do make mistakes. I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And it's the ability to hold your hand up and say, look, I think I've done something a little bit wrong, to let your internal IT or security team know so we can deal with the problem appropriately, not trying to bury it under the carpet and hide it away.
But I was thinking of a great example. Think of one of our young pen testers who started just before you came on board. And in his first week, he had an email from me. I think it was an email from me asking him to give, I've got a really important job for you to do, but I don't want anybody else to know. And it was completely incorrect email address and absolutely everything else. Just the display name was my name, right? And he gave him his telephone number and everything. It was amazing. And we've never stopped making fun of him ever since, because he is an amazing tester. So, and he is an example of it can happen to absolutely anybody. But still, hours of fun for us because we mention it every time. And he'll really enjoy us talking about this now as well. So, I mean, we've got nearly 60% of attendees have answered that poll. So thank you so much. So if we have a quick look at the results.
And actually, surprisingly, just looking at the results, 70% of people have said they've not been involved in a cyber breach. Yeah. Which is actually is really surprising, because I know personally I've been involved in a number of them. Yeah. Whether that's through my professional life or in the private life. Yeah. How many of you have ever received a phishing email around buying products that you weren't expecting, or trying to inherit money from Nigerian prince. Those are all the very start of a cyber breach.
They really are. Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to follow all the way through to completion and complete compromise of your company. I guarantee actually that percentage is probably the other way around. It's probably around 99% of people have been affected by one. The effect may not have been negative, but it will definitely be there.
Well, there is that famous stat, isn't it? Like 60% of all businesses have been breached in the last 12 months. The other 40% don't know, kind of thing, right? And it's valid. And there are the text message issues, right? Can you remember? I'm sure lots and lots of people will remember this from around this time last year. There was that run on Royal Mail text, so horrible word, smishing, right? So receiving illegitimate texts with links on them that will take you to a web page to steal your information. We'll probably see a run on those now coming up to Christmas, because it's that time of year and the Amazon stuff. Yeah, Tom is dead right. You'll see a lot of those type of breaches that people are completely unaware of, right? Right, fantastic. So I think now we move on to phase 2.
So I think phase 2 itself is going to be quite self-explanatory. It's taking all of that information we've got from phase 1, putting it together, and hopefully coming up with an attack to attack Sutton Hill.
Right.
Let's give it a go.
There we go.
We can now combine this information to produce a phishing or spear phishing campaign targeting the employees of Sutton Hill. For this particular example, we have registered a domain name that looks extremely similar to the real Access A Cloud domain, with the exception that the L has been replaced with an uppercase I. You'll notice that our phishing email has been carefully designed to look extremely convincing, as if it originated from the legitimate Access A Cloud service. This has been done for 2 reasons. Firstly, to show that not all phishing emails will be generic 365 forgotten your password, but also to show that with enough information disclosure, any company can be targeted with what would seem a realistic phishing threat. We will now change across to view the phishing email as if we were a user of the organisation, in this case the IT Systems Administrator, Bruce Cole. Here we can see the email has arrived in Bruce's inbox, and he's read and interacted with the email as if it would have come from a legitimate source. Clicking on the verify link contained within the phishing email, Bruce is taken to a landing page mocked up to look very similar to the Access A Cloud login portal that you would have seen previously. However, this portal has been modified to contain a number of new fields, including personally sensitive information such as the national insurance number, date of birth, and more crucially for us, fields for Bruce to enter his password. You will also notice that some of the fields have automatically been populated with Bruce's name and email address. This has been done as a further method to convince the user that this email had come from a legitimate source. Upon completing this form, Bruce will be redirected back to the main Sutton Hill website, although, as we have control of this, we can choose where to send him. If we wanted this to blend in and look very realistic, we may redirect him back to the legitimate Access A Cloud login portal for him to attempt to log in. The moment Bruce hits submit, his sensitive personal information, such as his national insurance number, date of birth, and more crucially his password, are sent to us as the attackers. How could we make use of this information? Well, we could use it to conduct financial fraud, or simply log it and use for later phases in an attack lifecycle. In this case, we're going to take the username and password that Bruce entered and try to use it to log into other services, such as Access A Cloud or Microsoft 365, trying to abuse a vulnerability known as password reuse, where a user uses the same password for multiple services. Jumping across to the Microsoft 365 portal, we will notice we are now able to attempt to authenticate as Bruce Cole with the email and password that we captured during the last phase. We'll notice that authentication in this case is successful, confirming that Bruce Cole does use the same username and password for multiple services. However, we were unable to log into Bruce's account due to the fact that he's currently got multi-factor authentication enabled, which prevents an attacker from progressing any further. This will also have notified Bruce that somebody may have attempted to access his account, as he will have gathered a notification on his mobile device. With that attack avenue unsuccessful, we will move on to looking for another way to potentially compromise Sutton Hill.
Oh, Damon, sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh, we were on mute. I do
there you go. We can hear
apologize.
you now.
There you go. I was on mute. There you go. The word of the year again, right? You're on mute. Sorry about that, everybody. Right. So as we can see, Sutton Hill then, Tom's initial compromise of the email account was foiled by the fact that the client actually had two-factor or multi-factor authentication enabled on their account. Now, just as a very, very quick explanation for those who don't know, multi-factor authentication, quite often we use one form of identification, which is our name or email address, and then a form of authentication, which is normally our password. If we add a second form of authentication, whether that's a token or a code from a mobile app or a SIM, SMS text message, that then becomes another form. So two-factor authentication. Lots of people will be familiar with fingerprints and things like that, which is a biometric form of two-factor authentication. But it's quite often a useful layer of defense to add. Now, we've got a poll up there asking if you use two-factor or multi-factor authentication. And what would be really interesting to know is, do you use it across all the accounts that you can use it? Because quite often we'll see people use it on maybe on their email account, but do you use it on your accountancy software if it's available and all other, other forms? Because we do, and it can be a pain, but it is a great form of defense.
And I think that applies in your business life as well as your personal life.
Yeah.
Now, everybody has a work email, and you may have multi-factor authentication turned on there because your employer, your organization has sort of told you must.
Yeah.
But have you done that on your personal email? Because time and time again, especially in individual circumstances, what we see is somebody's email become compromised, and then that leads to their Facebook account, their LinkedIn, their Twitter, all becoming compromised, because if you've got access to the email, you can do forgotten password resets. And suddenly it just spirals out of control.
Yeah.
Now, two-factor is not by any means, or multi-factor is not by any means the golden bullet. It won't solve all of your problems. It adds another layer to your defense. And the reason we call it factors, I think, as Damon previously iterated on, is to do with different factors. So the first one is something you know, it's your password. The second one is something you have, it might be your mobile phone. The third one might be it's something you are, it's your biometrics, it's your fingerprint or your face ID. And all of these can be brought together to add additional layers of security.
Yeah, it's worth saying. I always like the analogy of, if you're using two-factor authentication, as Tom rightly said, it's not a golden bullet. It won't stop a cyber criminal necessary. It just makes the process of compromise more complicated. And it's like the barking dog syndrome with burglars, right? They tend to, if they go to a house and there's a barking dog, they'll go to the house next door with no barking dog. It's a layer of security that exists. And that's what we spend most of our time in, right? Is trying to increase the layers. So we're going to just wrap up on this poll now. If anybody else, there's still some people answering, so that's fine. So out of all the people, so that's quite an interesting split, which is great to see.
Yeah, wonderful to see. I mean, we have a majority of 60-odd% of people who are currently using multi-factor authentication, which is great news.
Yeah.
The sad bit is 40% of people aren't. So
No.
that might be one of the action points to go away from this call. Go and work out what services you're using. Do they support multi-factor authentication? If they do, get it turned on.
And then we might have a debate here for a second, though, because I'm not a fan at all of SMS messaging, two-factor authentication, because I think of all the forms of two-factor authentication, it's the most vulnerable.
It is. The multi-factor authentication comes in different forms and different flavors.
Yeah.
And a bit like you're never going to always have a favorite child. You're never going to have a favorite form of multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
But arguably, yes, SMS is the weakest of the bunch, but it's still better than nothing.
It is still better than nothing. So that's the two-factor authentication where, still a lot of in favor with a lot of banks, right? That it will SMS text you a message with the code on it. I'm much more in favor of a hardware token if you can, but I appreciate they're expensive. But like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator are great alternatives, right?
Exactly. And actually, this is a good point when you bring up Microsoft Authenticator.
Yeah.
If you're using Office 365 and your organization has pushed out using multi-factor authentication, you go to log on and you either have to generate a 6-digit code in an application or you have to press the approve or deny button. I think there's two key points here I want to raise. Whenever that pops up on your mobile phone, don't just press approve. Make sure you're the person actually requesting it. Because as you saw in that last video, when we as the attackers went to log on to Bruce Cole's account, he would have got a pop-up on his mobile phone. If he just presses accept or approve every time it appears, it adds no defense to you. The other question here is actually one of Microsoft's new security functions. I don't know if you've come across it. They call it passwordless authentication.
Yeah.
And to log onto your account, all you need is the phone. And now that's good in practice. And yes, they want you to use your fingerprint to verify who you are.
Yeah.
But actually, in my eyes, that's taken a step back in security. We've gone from single factor using just passwords to multi-factor using passwords and authenticator apps to now just going back to single factor of the authenticator app.
Well, it is, because if you think, and I love Apple, right? I've used Apple for a long time, but the fact that I unlock there's three ways I can unlock my laptop. One is with just my finger. So that really is only one factor because it doesn't ask me for a password. And you are right, more scarily, if I've got my watch on, I can walk up and it'll automatically unlock my laptop. So, I mean, there are levels of protection. As soon as I take my watch off, it'll lock and take those facilities off. But you are right. We are reducing down to one factor.
And I think that's the problem is it's convenient for all of these things to work. But in reality, sometimes convenience and security don't go very well together.
No, well, this is right. And there is a sliding scale from convenience and secure. The more convenient something is, 9 out of 10 times, the less secure it is. The more secure something is, the less convenient and easy it is to use and available, right? I suppose. Right, so let's move on to phase 3. So this is now going to be your second attempt.
It is. So phase 2 was unsuccessful.
Yeah.
You can't get into Bruce's account. He's got two-factor authentication turned on. So instead of looking at password reuse, where Bruce has used the same password for multiple services, in this exercise, we're going to have a look at common passwords. And we're going to look at how humans are predictable when they make passwords, and if we can use common language from an organization or an industry sector to help us identify passwords and breach an organization.
Awesome. Here we go. Let's go for it.
The other way organizations tend to become breached is through the use of weak and insecure passwords that have been previously disclosed in past data breaches, or use personal terms such as pets' names, partners, dates, or key business terminology. This attack is known as password spraying, and is where a threat actor would use a range of passwords revealed in previous data breaches to try to log into an account. This makes up a large amount of background noise, commonly referred to as internet background radiation, and is constantly detected by security operation centers around the world. In order to conduct a targeted attack, in this case against Sutton Hill, we first need to understand a bit more about their business and industry to come up with a list of common words or phrases that may be familiar to their employees when creating their passwords. This can be easily achieved by using a tool called CEWL, which looks at the company website, identifies words and phrases, and ranks them based upon the frequency that they occur. Once we have a base list of words, we're able to mangle these words to match common password policies. Whilst it can be extremely difficult to get the right word mangling rules, thankfully humans are very predictable with how they come up with solutions to problems. And a common example of this is when asked to create a password. Firstly, the user will look around the room or choose a word or phrase that is common or close to them in their day-to-day activities. Secondly, when a website tells them they need to have a capital letter, the majority of users will always capitalize the first letter of their password. When told to add a numerical character, the majority of users will append a digit to the end of their password. This will typically be the numbers 1, 0, 1, or the current year in either a 2 or 4-digit notation. And finally, when asked to add a symbol to their password, 90% of users will add a single exclamation mark to the very end. This means, because of this predictable behaviour, we can produce a series of word mangling rules to manipulate our word set to produce passwords that could have potentially been used by employees of Sutton Hill. Next, we need to combine our list of employees gathered during the reconnaissance phase and the list of passwords we just generated to undertake a password spraying attack against Microsoft 365. Traditionally, a real threat actor will conduct this password spraying attack over many days, weeks, or months. But in order to speed it up for the demonstration, we're going to set the timeout to 0, which may cause a number of accounts to become locked out because of a number of incorrect authentication attempts. And just like that, we've managed to recover the password for the user Tara Brown as Sutton Hill 2021 exclamation mark. This password may seem simplistic. However, with our experience dealing with real customers, this password is actually on the stronger side of the spectrum when we compare it to passwords that we've seen in data breaches and that we've cracked in real-life engagements. Now we have a valid set of credentials. All we have left to do is log in to Microsoft 365 and hope that multi-factor authentication isn't deployed to all users in the organisation. Jumping across to the 365 portal, we enter the email address for Tara Brown, the password that we've just cracked, Sutton Hill 2021 exclamation mark, and we're able to gain access to her account, her email inbox. From here, a malicious actor may conduct a range of malicious activities, including stealing or exfiltrating confidential data, configuring email forwarding rules to send emails with particular words or phrases outside the organisation. However, we're going to demonstrate a slightly different attack vector, which is where an attack can come from within the organisation using our position of trust and privilege to move laterally to another user or to a more valuable target. In our example, we could use John Wright, the CEO or founder, or Bruce Cole, the IT systems administrator.
Right, so there we go. So the second form of compromise worked.
Well, looks like it. We're into Sutton Hill. We've got past the initial barrier. We're into Tara's inbox.
Right.
Now, we could spend ages talking about this. We could look at how many of you actually use passwords in that sort of format. But I think actually the most interesting thing here is to see what we can do.
Yeah.
So if we jump on to the next stage of the attack.
Yeah, especially as we've spent way too long talking, everybody's shouting at us about that we've taken too long, we've got to get through this live hack, right? So let's jump on then.
Yeah. So let's see this in action.
Phase 3, lateral movement. In order to attack the systems administrator Bruce Cole, we will first need to create the pretext for our attack. This will be, in our case, attaching a malicious Word document to an email asking for Bruce's help. To generate our malicious Word document, we will jump across to our Linux workstation and use the common hacking toolset Metasploit framework to generate us an Office document containing a Word macro. A Word macro is a piece of embedded code that will run inside a Word document and allow an attacker to automatically run potentially malicious software on your machine as an initial foothold for further compromise. This malicious document can then be combined with our access to Tara's email account to allow us to send a second phishing attack, this time between internal employees. Here you can see us generating our Word macro and setting up our multi-handler, the ability to catch any return communications from Bruce's computer when he opens the document. Using Tara's account, we will create a new email message, address it to Bruce Cole, we'll set the subject and the message body, and finally we will attach our malicious Word document that we have just generated. Jumping across to look at this from Bruce's perspective, he's received an email from Tara Brown asking for assistance. Now normally Bruce is relatively switched on and won't open at email attachments that have come from an untrusted source. However, in this instance we are abusing the trust relationship established between employees, in this case Tara and Bruce, in order to convince him to open an email attachment. Upon opening the Word document, you'll notice that the top of the Word document displays a security warning banner saying that embedded macros have currently been disabled. However, the content of the Word document contains a warning to Bruce to say, in order to see the document, you need to press the Enable Content button. The moment he presses that button, we will get our connection back from Bruce's computer, effectively compromising him and potentially the rest of the organisation just by simply clicking a single button. We are then able to do a bit more enumeration on Bruce's system, including obtaining information about his current user, the desktop or laptop he is currently using, or even take screenshots of what his current desktop looks like. This could include any documents that are open, or just simply in this case, seeing his wallpaper. We are also able to do things such as take a live stream from Bruce Cole's webcam, so we're able to see the user who is sitting in front of the keyboard. We are also able to upload files to Bruce Cole's machine, including, in this case, our own version of ransomware, encrypt.exe. Once uploaded, an attacker is able to execute the uploaded program and start the process of encrypting all the files and folders on Bruce Cole's laptop. Additionally, we can conduct more technical attacks, such as gaining privilege by going from a normal user to a system administrator level, as well as extracting sensitive information, such as password hashes, that could be used for later lateral movement around the organisation of Sutton Hill.
Right, so we managed to compromise them. Well done.
We got in.
We got in. We got in.
And the worrying part was, and I know we do this day in, day out, it wasn't very difficult.
No.
Effectively, the moment Bruce opened the Word document, he was compromised.
Yeah.
The moment Tara chose to set a weak password, she was compromised. Sometimes, and actually in the majority of cyber breaches we go to, it's not highly technical, highly sophisticated attacks coming from nation-state threat actors and countries. A lot of the times it's just people doing silly things.
Yeah, well, and bad implementation of systems as well. So not even the users, they're left vulnerable by the application developers, right? So as saying a secure password is a password with a capital letter, a number, and a symbol doesn't mean it's a secure password, as you alluded to in one of the...
Exactly. And I think that's the difference here between compliance and just ticking the boxes and actually trying to do security properly. I mean, we've got a question up on screen for you now around Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials is a certification that's put in place by the UK government, by the NCSC, and it's very simply the entry stepping stones into a cybersecurity. So it looks at your organization and checks, are you installing patches? Do you have a good password policy? Do you do patching well? Do you run antivirus? It's got a number of different stepping stones that it's looking for. Yeah. And it's definitely a wonderful first step. It's not the panacea. It won't stop you getting breached, nor will doing Cyber Essentials Plus or ISME governance or even ISO 27001. But it's a step in the right direction.
Well, it's a great initial layer as well. It's treated as a gap analysis, I always think, an understanding of what the basics should be, and then, how far short of that are you? And quite often, it doesn't mean, because cybersecurity itself shouldn't be an expensive process, right? It should be, a lot of it should be just configuring what you already have properly. If you're still running Windows 95 or Windows XP, then yes, there's going to be an element of upgrading required to become secure. But quite often, it's just what you have. Don't leave it in the default state. If you've got a Draytech router, change the password and those type of things.
It's back to that thing we commented on earlier. Security and convenience aren't the same thing, and they actually fight each other day to day.
No, completely right.
The convenient out-the-box setup for your laptop, for your firewall, for your mobile phone is set up in convenience mode. It should work for everybody out the box.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's set up securely out the box. Yeah. So we're going to have to effectively make sure that we go through and we reconfigure those and we make those things secure.
That's right. And again, it's just understanding the risk. The whole purpose of why Wolfberry exists and why cybersecurity really exists should be the ability of a client to understand what data they have and best ways to protect it, because that's all cybersecurity is, whether it's GDPR or anything else. It's understanding what you have and wrapping appropriate controls around it. And for our international visitors as well, there may be some explanation around the fact that of the video of the webcam was a cute little children's character called Pingu. I have no idea how he appeared there or how he can actually use a computer, but that's fine. We got through it. That's no problem at all. So let's just move on very quickly. It would have been interesting, I think, with the Cyber Essentials question is having another one, another point saying, have you ever heard of it? Right? Yeah. Would have been probably useful.
And likewise, Cyber Essentials is very much a UK-focused certification. The only reason I've known international companies to go for that accreditation is purely because they want to work with a UK government company, the MOD, for example, who say that that's a prerequisite.
Exactly.
But it's not the final nail in the coffin, but it is definitely one of the first steps on the pathway to moving in the right direction.
No, I completely agree. So I think obviously, I think we've got our timing slightly out there, because I will say, me and Tom thought we had plenty of time, so we'd relax and have a nice chat, and then realised that we were running out of time a little bit. So I do apologise for that. I want to leave that on the screen, what we've got there to do the basics. But Lloyd, if you've got any questions that you would like to fire through, and anything that we don't pick up on, I mean, we're more than happy to answer over email if that's okay. But Lloyd, if you've got any questions for us, that would be wonderful.
Great stuff. Thank you, Damon and Tom. I think the key message there is about, people, process, and procedures. I picked that up strongly, and about raising awareness across the whole organization. I know that Wolfbury has got great resources, as has ACCA. So we've had a lot of questions through. We won't be able to answer them all. So if you do have a question, please use the Contact Wolfbury widget, which is part of the frame that you'll see. So do use that and fire through any questions. Well, we've got a couple of questions in the time that we've got. With the need to use different and complex passwords for different services, what do you think about the use of password manager systems?
I think password managers are great.
They're amazing.
I don't know any of my own passwords. Nope. They're all stored in a password manager. There's 101 different password managers out there. Choose the one that is right for you. There are free alternatives that work perfectly well, as there are paid alternatives.
Yeah.
If you're an Apple user and you're living in that ecosystem, the built-in keychain is great, and it will just work out the box for you. If you use different platforms, Windows, Mac, iPhone, and Android, you can go for solutions like 1Password, LastPass, Bitwarden, are just some of the ones that I've used in the past.
Yep, and they are much better at remembering passwords than you are. Well, not you personally, Lloyd.
Good advice. No. And we would just come into that point as well. We'd seen the access into the system. So what would your first step be if a company or an individual is affected by a ransomware attack? What's the first thing you should do?
Right. So a lot of this is very contextual, and it really depends on what's happened, how quickly you are to respond. Yeah. Traditionally, the best answer would be to disconnect. So if it's just my laptop or my computer that started to be encrypted, would be to get that off the network, to isolate it from the rest of the company, so one problem doesn't become 10 or 15. Depending on how quickly catch it, it might be too late for that. Obviously, we never recommend paying a ransom because it just goes of funding criminal activity. But arguably, it has to become a business decision. And there is no right or wrong answer when it comes to a business and how to recover. But arguably, it comes down to what are the key parts of your business and what bits do we need to focus on getting back up and running sooner rather than later. And that will vary throughout the month.
Yeah, quite often, the problem with ransomware is you won't realize it's happening quite often until you get the message on the screen. You can be lucky where someone will go and access a shared drive and that file is coming up with gobbledygook and someone will work it out. But quite often you don't know until after the case that it's happened, which can lead to a problem. The only thing I would ever say, exactly as Tom said, disconnected from the network, try not to turn computers off because they will hold valuable information of how the attack has happened and started. And obviously as well, having layers of protection in place would be really useful. So an ability to be able to replay what's happened on a device by looking at some sort of security console, you can work out where it's gone, where it's spread to, what it's done, where it came from. So that's always pretty useful. So it's a case of being organized and prepared for the attack before the attack happens, really. So then,
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And what about cyber insurance? Is that enough, or do people need to use that in collaboration with cybersecurity?
That's a good question. Yeah, mechanisms. It's something that is becoming a hot topic. And in fact, we had a conversation in the office with a underwriter and broker a couple of days ago, back end last week, and it's becoming a problem because underwriters now, unless organizations can prove a level of cybersecurity, they're refusing to insure them. And for those, it's very much like bad credit, Lloyd, right? Where organizations used to be able to pay £200 a year for their premium. If they've got nothing in place now, they're having to pay £2,000. We're seeing cases of. So cyber insurance is no longer becoming an easy option for businesses, but it was never really a solution, because how do you put a price on your reputation? If a company, you know, gets hacked, gets breached, and it's a really horrible one that damages your reputation in any way, no amount of cyber insurance is going to protect you from that. So it has its place, because even we have cyber insurance as a company, right? But it's not the be all and end all. Again, it's a layer, right?
Great.
Yeah.
And
Thank
I'd
you
like
both
the
very
insurance-
much. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Mike.
Unfortunately, we run out of time, but as you'll see from the slide there, and as you'll see from all the resources that we've got available through Wolfbury and through ourselves, ACCA, and from bodies such as the National Cybersecurity Centre, there is help and guidance there for all levels of an organisation. If you can fire any questions through the widget to Wolfbury, our colleagues will get back to them. But in the meanwhile, thank you so much, Tom and Damon, for all the guidance you've given us, for scaring us a little bit as well, but also for bringing home that thing about this is a shared responsibility. This is about everybody within the organisation taking that responsibility and having the process and the procedures and abiding by them. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks very much. Goodbye now.
Cheers, live. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.